learn what is dependency injection, how it can help us, and how we can use it in a Node.js application. So here we have a basic Node.js application, and it has only one route, which is a get route, and we can pass the environment, and whatever we pass, it just returns this. For example, if we passed test, it just returns as test, and if we pass dev, it just returns as dev. So it will help us to understand different environments in a minute. Let's see what we have done here. So whenever you are hitting this URL, it is calling a function in user service. So let's see what is inside our user service. So our user service is a service what contains our business logic, what happens in a usual application, right? So in user service there is a function called get user data, and it is calling another service called user repository. So repository, let's say that it is our database class. Okay, so whenever we are calling user repository, we are calling a function inside it, which is some function, and we can have some kind of expensive database calls here, right? Now in reality there is no problem. We are separating our functionalities between user service and user repositories, which is really nice. It helps us with the single responsibility principle, but we have created a separate problem. The problem here is we are coupling our classes. So in order for user service to work properly, we need an instance of user repository which is created inside this user service class. So we can't use a different repository for this one, right? So in general this is not a problem, but let's say you want to test this user service. What you will need to do is you will initiate an actual repository class, create an instance, and use the function with actual database calls, which is really costly. We want to avoid that, and usually what we do is we just create a mock repository class. So here is our mock repository class, and we can just use it whenever depending on the environment, but currently there is no way to do it, right? So that's one problem. And second problem is, if you for some reason need to change the implementation of the user repository, let's say you are using PostgreSQL and now you want to use MongoDB, and now you have created a separate repository with, let's say, Mongo user repository. You have to replace this everywhere in your class, which is not good. So these are the problems. I hope you understand. The main problem is our user service is tightly coupled with user repository, which is not a good thing. We want as much decoupling as possible inside our application. Now what we can do to solve it? There are multiple ways to solve it. We can put a if condition here. If env equals to test, then do one thing, or if the environment is dev, do another thing, something like that. But that is not a clean way to do it. Instead, what we can do is we can take the concept of dependency injection and make our application run smoothly. So what dependency injection means is we will not create any instance of user repository inside this user service class. We will pass it down as a parameter. So in our user service class, we will pass the user repository as a parameter. Now there are many ways to do it, and we will use a nice library called TypeDI. It is very popular. It works well with TypeScript, so that's why we will be using this. And let's see how we can make our application more decoupled, taking the advantage of dependency injection. So first you have to install this. Just for the record, I have already created a blog for this as well, so you can just visit the blog, read the blog. If you don't like videos, I'll link it in the description as well. So first you have to install these dependencies. I have already installed those, so I will not install it again. Then you have to import this line inside your index.ts file. It's at the top of your index.ts file, okay? Because we will be using some decorators and we need support for that. And then as you are creating a TypeScript project, there must be a tsconfig.json file, and you have to add these two lines there. It will help us to use decorators inside our TypeScript project. That's it for the preparation. Now the first thing we need to do is we need to tell TypeDI that we want a user repository instance somewhere in your application, but we don't know yet where, right? So we'll import this service from the TypeDI and mark this user repository class as a service. What it does is it tells TypeDI that okay, down the line we will need an instance of user repository. So TypeDI, what it will do, it will create an instance of the user repository at the beginning of the application. It will store it in a container, okay, and it will just pass it down whenever we need it. Let's say when we need it, let's go to our user service class, and now instead of creating this here, we can do it in multiple ways. Let's first do it this way. So as I said, we'll have an instance of this user repository class inside the global container. That container is provided by the TypeDI application, right? TypeDI library. So if we do this, our code should work in the same way. Let's see if we hit dev. Yes, we can see that it is calling the function inside the real user repository and printing the message there, right? So our code is working fine, although we didn't initiate any instance of user repository here, right? This is kind of a cumbersome way because we have to initiate this everywhere. Let's see if we have multiple functions here. We'll need to do this once again inside the some other function as well, so it will get dirty pretty soon. So let's make it common. User repository, and right, so let's see if it works now. It will not work, right? You can see it will not work here because we have this user repository here, but we didn't initiate this anywhere, right? So how we can initiate this automatically? We have another decorator here called inject. So what inject will do, whatever you will be giving it, it will just pass down an instance from the container automatically. If we mark it as with inject, we should have a user repository whenever we'll be needing it, right? So let's see if it works. Okay, let's mark it as a service class as well. Now we have another problem. The problem is we are initiating this user service class from our index.ts file, but it cannot initiate it without the help of TypeDI. Okay, so let's make it a little different. Let's pass it with our constructor, public user repo, user repository, right? If we just pass it down the user repo, TypeDI will automatically detect that okay, this user service class needs an instance of user repository. Let's just give it to him. Okay, now it will not work again. The reason is in our user repository user service initialization, where we are initializing it in the route, we are not giving it any user repository class. So let's do it. New user repository, and we can just pass it down here, and yes, it should automatically work again. Okay, so this is one way to do it. Now remember the problem that we were discussing it previously. The problem that we're trying to solve is whenever we're using a test environment, we don't want this user repository class, right? So in order to solve that problem, what we can do is we can pass down the mock repository based on the environment. And to do that, let's just see what we can do. We'll create two instances, one for mock repo, one for real repo, and we will call this user service class and see what is the current environment. And if it's a test environment, we'll pass down the mock repo, and if it's the real environment, we'll pass down the real repository. And then our user service will call the sum function based on whatever was passed down to it, right? So let's say we call with dev environment on the console. You will see that it is calling the real repository, and whenever you need to test it, if you pass test, you can see that now it is calling the mock repository, right? So you can see that this user service class is not directly coupled with this user repository anymore. It is decoupled from it, and it is calling whatever we are passing to it. So that's why this is called dependency injection, because repository is a dependency for user service class and we are injecting it through some parameters. So this is the concept of dependency injection. We can go very deep into it and we can create an interface for the user service or user repository and implement it, but those are not those are out of scope. This is more of a general introduction to the dependency injection, the concept of dependency injection, and this is the way you can do it. So thank you for watching. I hope you have learned something new today and hope to see you in the next one. And I will add all of these codes and the blog and all the resources in the description below. Thank you for watching. See you later.